I love woodworking. I mostly got into woodworking just because I was too cheap to pay somebody to do stuff I could do around the house, but I've grown to love it over time. I remember though when I first started getting into woodworking, I kind of put a bookshelf together. I was super excited to get it all put together. I screwed it all together, and then all of a sudden I realized that this thing is garbage. Like the sides didn't match. It was just not a workable bookshelf. And I came to realize that the reason my bookshelf wasn't coming together like I wanted it to is because I didn't have the right tools. There were specific tools that I needed to make the bookshelf work that I couldn't work around with other tools. I couldn't just kind of figure it out in some other way. I needed the proper tools. And once I got the proper tools, woodworking became a real joy. It expanded my ability to do things. It made it a lot faster for me to build things. And all of a sudden, woodworking was something I got into and really enjoyed. I think the same thing happens with interpreting the Bible for ourselves. A lot of times we come to the Bible, we really want to understand it, we want to interpret it for ourselves, but we just don't have the right tools and don't even know that we don't have the right tools. And so I think that if we can just get the right tools, reading the Bible, understanding it, and interpreting it can be a joy and be something we really delve into and something we love. And so I want to equip you to do that, to interpret the Bible, to dig in for yourself. And so we're building a toolbox for you here on Bootleg Bible College. So one of the first main issues that people have, I think, when approaching Bible study for themselves is they don't even know what they're doing. We can kind of come to the Bible, we read the words, and then we just sort of interpret it. But there's a lot to this task that goes into this task. And so I want to introduce you to a couple of concepts. The first is exegesis. So exegesis sounds really intimidating. It's not really, it just means to pull meaning out. It's from a Greek word meaning that to literally to take out meaning. And so the task of exegesis is it's the base level task to interpreting the Bible. And so when you think about somebody writing 2,000 plus years ago, you have to think that they were writing as a specific person to a specific set of people, and that the meaning from that biblical text is found in that author's original intent for the people he was writing to. That is the basis of meaning for the text. And so the task of exegesis is really just finding out authorial intent, finding out what that author was trying to get across to his readers, so that then we can take that to the next level, which is called hermeneutics. So hermeneutics is the process of taking that text and applying it to today, kind of bridging that divide and seeing what it means for us today. And so these are two separate tasks. And a lot of people have the issue of approaching the text and moving straight into hermeneutics, reading it, assuming what it means, and then bringing it into hermeneutics. But without a proper exegetical base, you can't possibly know how the hermeneutics should be applied. We have to get that foundation first. So a lot of what this class is going to be is figuring out how to do good exegesis, right? Figuring out the tools for exegesis so that our hermeneutics can be better, so that we can interpret and bring the Bible better into today. So when we approach any sort of media, whether it be written, visual, whatever, we bring with us a certain set of assumptions. Those assumptions are usually so ingrained in us, it's hard to even know they're assumptions, even know that that's how we think. And so part of the task of exegesis is understanding our own assumptions and how those might be different from what the author's assumptions are. And so I'll put this into some perspective. Our modern society is hyper individualistic, like individual rights, individual property. These are like values that we hold today. It's just the way our minds are taught to think. Yet we look at a biblical text 2,000+ years ago, they were not individualistic people. They were communal people. That was their assumption. They assumed that they were sort of all in this together and that, they were a community first. And so when we approach the text with this individualistic lens, it can really mess up the text for us because the authors aren't assuming that their readers are individualist. They're assuming a communal mindset. And so we have to get our minds wrapped around some of these assumptions that we bring to the text and figure out how the author might have been assuming everything was going on. And don't get me wrong, you will never approach anything with no assumptions whatsoever. It's just who we are. It's how we've been taught. It's how we've grown up with these things just being so real. It is pretty difficult actually to get outside of our own assumptions. So part of the task of even interpreting is kind of understanding ourselves and knowing the ways that we think before we come to the text and maybe looking out for some of those things. Context is something you're going to hear me talk a lot about during this tool building exercise. As we build tools, exegesis is based on context, and we're trying to figure out context from so many different angles. There's the cultural angle, like I've talked about a little bit. We'll get into sort of the backgrounds of the New Testament, the way people thought back then, but there's also the context of just the text. Right? When we approach let's take a single verse in the Bible, there's a lot of context to that single verse. The first context is all the stuff around it, all the passage, the section that the verse is found in. We call that the pericope. It's just a piece of text, a group of text, like a paragraph, basically. So we take our pericope, all the stuff around that actual verse, into consideration in our context. Every piece of writing has a logic to it. There's a building process of that logic, and so we have to understand the stuff before and after in order to understand the context of the passage specifically right there. There's also the context of an entire book. Really, the entire book is logic over and over again. The whole book together constitutes a whole. And so the context of the whole book, who was writing it, who they were writing it to, is a huge part of the context of even a single verse. And so we have to take that into account. There's also, especially in the New Testament, taking into account the Old Testament. When you think about it, these authors in the New Testament, they are writing to people who were fully formed in the Hebrew scriptures, in their scripture. And so we have to look back into the Old Testament. We have to understand the Old Testament because that's the basis they're working from. These authors assume that all of their readers understand something about the Old Testament, that they understand the narrative and the flow and what happens. And so I would say you can't understand the New Testament without having a working knowledge of the Old Testament. And so even that context comes into what we're talking about. So let's go back to our single verse that we're dealing with. If we were to take that single verse, we were going to remove it from all that context, all the cultural backgrounds, all the stuff around it, and just interpret it for ourselves, bring it into today, just go straight to hermeneutics. What we would be doing is reading meaning into that text. We would be taking our own assumptions, taking all of our biases and reading it into the text, and we call that eisegesis. That's where you read a meaning into a text. We want to be exegetes, people who pull meaning out of the text in order to understand it. And so these tools will be focused on helping you be a good exegete, knowing how to put text into its proper context. And I know all of this probably sounds complicated, like there's a lot of words flying around here and all that, but with just a few simple tools, it's really easy to figure out context. It's really easy to deal with some of these passages, and these will be tools you will get better at using over time. They're tools that will build on one another until you can use them as a complete whole. And so we're going to be talking about translations, like what is the best translation to use? How should I, what translation should I use to study the Bible? We'll be talking about backgrounds of the New Testament and Old Testament from a cultural perspective, the way that they thought about things. We're going to be talking about genre and reading a book in its proper genre. That goes a long way towards really interpreting a Bible a section of scripture as it was intended to be interpreted. So we're building tools. We're building you up as people who are more confident in interpreting the Bible and understanding it on Bootleg Bible College. So I just invite you along for this journey. This is something I love doing. One of my master's degrees is actually in biblical exegesis. And so this is something I love teaching. This is something I love showing other people how to do. And I can't wait for you to join this series with me. I would love to hear about some of the roadblocks maybe you've encountered on interpreting the Bible for yourself. What are some of the sticking points? What are some of the things that have made you not be able to do that in the past? What has been overwhelming to you? Put that in the comments and I'll make sure and talk about some of those things just so we're answering all of your questions. So make sure and go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you know when new episodes come out. And yeah, we'll see you next week at Bootleg Bible College.